Hey everyone, I was inspired by the How Learning Works book chapter on metacognition, particularly on page 214, where it talks about modeling your own metacognitive process for your students. And so I thought I have not yet developed a full 103 syllabus because I keep getting assigned to teach it and I keep getting switched to something else. But it would be good for me to have that on file. So I'm going to talk you through my process of coming up with a 103 course. I'm going to break this video into multiple parts and label them so you can decide which ones you want to watch or not watch, depending on what you want to hear me talk through. So this video is going to be about the 103 course goals and course requirements and how I envision the course as a big picture within the writing program. All right, 103, Rhetoric and Writing. So let's look at the course description to start out. I'm on the Ball State webpage for 103 here. So the course description says that the course introduces understandings of rhetoric, basic research methods, elements, strategies, and conventions of persuasion used in constructing written and multimodal texts. So things that stand out to me there are rhetoric is really the first thing we see that's really important to this course, as well as persuasion, using multimodal texts, and maybe some basic research, but I'm understanding from this definition that research isn't the focus the way it is in 104. So 104 is really getting much more into those research methods, but I want to kind of lay the foundation here because these students will go on to take that. But more importantly, I want to do rhetoric as a foundation and persuasion as a foundation. So let's look at the course goals. Again, I see these keywords pop up again and again. Understanding persuasion, understanding how texts are persuasive, both visual and verbal, various media. So again, I know I want some kind of multimodal text because that's going to be a focus of the writing program at Ball State in general and comes up several times in the 103 goals. Also, rhetoric, rhetorical situation, writing for different audiences and purposes, using research as appropriate for the rhetorical situation, things like that come up a lot. And then the other thing I see is just general process, which I would focus on in any writing course, honestly, about inventing, drafting, their own progress, things like that. So I have kind of an idea of my keys for 103 are persuasion, rhetoric, multimodality, and process. They're probably the four big things I want to make sure are in my 103 course. And this is repeated a lot in the course content and format, which is just kind of being more specific about how we will achieve the course goals. A few things that do stand out to me here is that I feel like reading is going to be more important in 103 than it might be in my 104. My 104, obviously reading is important, but I have students bring in a lot of their own texts. So they bring in a topic that they're working on this semester and they research and find their own articles to read. Whereas I feel like in 103 there's a lot of discussing and analyzing and responding to a variety of texts. I see things like that, analyzing. So I'm thinking that sometimes I'll be providing the text or at least guiding them a bit more than I would in 104 in terms of what the texts they're going to be reading. Another thing I notice here is this last bullet about composing a variety of writing assignments in for multiple purposes, audience, and context using a variety of media and including primary and secondary research. So this is important to me because I think of my 104 class as building towards one big paper, one big research project. Like I said, they choose their topics. That's how I envision 104. It's not how everyone teaches it or how you have to, but that's how I see it. So to me, this tells me maybe my assignments in 103 are going to be a little bit more distinct and a little bit more like, let's write for this audience, now let's write for this other type of paper for this other audience or for this other purpose. So that's how I envision that goal playing out. In terms of the requirements here, I see that there are 4 writing projects required, but they're all about the same length. So that's reinforcing my idea that each of these projects will kind of stand alone for a different audience. and a different purpose rather than really scaffolding them to lead to something bigger. Another requirement here, again, this confirms my idea that reading is maybe going to be a little bit more a part of this course, and I think you're really even teaching them how to do reading with the purpose of analyzing and responding. And informal writing, well, that's always going to be a part of my writing course, so I'm not too worried about incorporating that goal. So things I think about with 103 are how do I really get them thinking about that idea of rhetoric, about audience, and how to write for different situations. So I'm thinking that I want 4 different writing assignments. I do want to think about how they're sequenced. I'm thinking about, do I want an overall theme for my course? That seems more appropriate to me for 103 than it does for 104. Where I really want to teach them in 104 how to develop their own research question. Here, they're definitely still doing some research, but I feel like I could have an overall question for the class or an overall theme for the class. So one of the themes I've considered is the idea of identity. I think this is a fairly common first-year writing theme, and I think it's because a lot of students come into college trying to figure out who are they in this new setting, how does identity work, they're changing rapidly at that age, and so it's an interesting theme. So I'm thinking, how does that fit with rhetoric? Well, as I mentioned before, one of the most powerful ideas for me about rhetoric is that it has to do with identification. So I'm thinking right now that my kind of overarching question that I want 103 to focus on is, how can we use rhetoric to identify with and persuade an audience? So I'm just going to let that question sit. How can we use rhetoric to identify with and persuade an audience? And I'm going to let that percolate in my brain a bit and think through, how could I develop some assignments based on that? What kinds of things could students do to really answer that question? And that is the end of this video about the goals and kind of overview of how I'm envisioning my 103 course. Next up, we'll talk about some specific assignment ideas I have for 103. Thanks.